A joke in the American public. It was 3,500 people not doing their jobs, wasting $900 million in taxpayer funds every year, looking the other way, protecting financial predators from investors. And they were supposed to be doing the opposite. They were supposed to be protecting investors from financial predators, but they became captive to the industry because the industry lobbied Congress and defanged the SEC over a period of multiple decades. The SEC didn't become bad overnight. It didn't happen under the Bush administration only. It happened under multiple administrations, under multiple presidencies, and it happened. They haven't done a big case there since the mid-'80s, since Ivan Boesky and Dennis Levine.
Right.
And Michael Milken. They haven't done the big cases for decades now. It was a slow process of defanging the SEC, and now we have a non-functional agency that would need to improve several-fold just to become dysfunctional. So dysfunctional has to be their near-term objective, and then they have to become functional. So it's crawl.
Well, Harry, let me stop you for a minute. Defanged. When you use that word, I found it interesting. Was that done on purpose? Did Wall Street, were they involved to slowly defang this organization, as you say?
Yes.
Okay.
And there were places they would never let them go. Every time that the SEC tried to regulate over-the-counter products, they were told no. And the lead aider and abetter was Alan Greenspan.
Right.
And so you had people at the highest levels of government under multiple administrations, and the guy kept getting reappointed. Alan Greenspan will go down in history as the worst Fed chairman ever. My nickname for him is Mr. Bubbles. He never met a crisis he didn't want to inflate his way out of to cause the next crisis. He never instilled moral hazard in investors. He aided and abetted moral hazard.
This was also from your piece last week. If this is what the paper tiger SEC decided to charge GE with, who knows what creativity really took place? I'm sure the financial scoundrels everywhere are laughing all the way to the bank, end quote. What about the corruption at the SEC that Harry Markopoulos talked about and you have talked about? How bad is it? Because you seemed outraged by the small fines that were imposed, Bill, and called them speeding tickets.
Well, I think that, first of all, I agree with everything that Harry said, and especially with the problem that associates with Greenspan. I mean, that's not unlike an advertisement for my Greenspan Bubbles book. But I think it's very important to be clear on one word. When you say corruption, I think people need to understand it's corruption. It's more like corrosion, the way a pipe gets corroded. Corruption makes it sound like there was a concerted effort to do the wrong thing or something like that, and I think corrosion is a much better term. I don't know as much about the SEC as perhaps he did, since he was in there trying to get them to focus on Bernie Madoff. But I think that somehow there was enough lobbying pressure, enough Wall Street clout and juice, and maybe Greenspan helped. I mean, surely Greenspan helped with his wrong-headed ideological thinking that caused at the top of the SEC an attitude that maybe caused the line men and women, who I think were good people doing their job, to wind up not really finding a lot of these things until after the fact. So I think if there was mismanagement, it would have started near the top, which of course where the political appointees would come into question. At the time, I thought, for instance, Harry Pitt was a poor choice of SEC chairman, and I think Chris Cox was obviously in way over his head. So I think the problems there really kind of emanated from the top, although Harry had firsthand knowledge of working along the line. And there was another story that Gretchen Morgenson at the New York Times covered, a story with Pequot and Capital and Microsoft, and Gary Gear, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, this is back in 2006, had claimed that he was stopped from pursuing a line of investigation that he wanted to by some of his superiors, and then he wound up getting fired after he had this sterling record. So there is some smoke there about pressure, but I think it's important to know that it looks like it kind of came from the top there, and it wasn't the individuals at the SEC. I think that he's right, that we need to have a strong functioning SEC, and I think that going forward that will change. I think that the paper tigerness of the SEC, I'm a little bit surprised at the outcome that I wrote about, where there was all this blather about Sarbanes-Oxley was going to stop fraud from happening after Enron, and in the wake of Enron, we have all the financial systems blow up, not the least of which is because they had all these special investment vehicles, which was exactly what Enron had. And then we can have the individuals that signed off on these financial statements that appeared to be fraudulent, though GE never didn't claim or deny this. This was a settlement, right? So it's not like anyone was convicted of anything. But if those accusations were true, why just go for the fine, and why not go after the people that signed these documents that should have been liable from Sarbanes-Oxley standpoint? I mean, why go for a settlement in a case like GE if you really thought you had something. I mean, aren't we supposed to put a stop? Don't we want to put a stop to this sort of thing? And similarly, the shoving match that was Merrill Lynch, Congress, and Bank of America, and Ken Lewis. Did he make misleading claims or did he not make misleading claims? If he didn't make the misleading claims, why go for the settlement and make them all look bad? I mean, if GE didn't do it, why make them look bad? So, I mean, the SEC should have, these are the kind of things they should either take to their full conclusion or not do, but this halfway measure seems all wrong.
My second question regarding Harry's comments, and Bill, you've chronicled this for quite some time and written a book about this, what you just talked about, Greenspan's bubbles. But what about Alan Greenspan and his role in this sick, destructive experiment of leverage, where, as Harry said, he was the lead aider and abetter?
Well, I got kind of a big opinion about Greenspan. I mean, not only was he incompetent, I believe he was an egomaniac who basically ran the Fed on the applause meter. And by that I mean by about 1995 or 6 or 7, he was really starting to believe that he decided the stock market going up was sort of a compliment to his stewardship of the Fed. And so all these things, higher prices of anything seemed to make people happy. Therefore, he was sort of worshipped. He was lionized. And he felt he could solve the problems by printing more money. And so it's hard to overstate how much damage that one man did to so many people in America.
I just don't think people really understand. Yet he's bowing before the Queen and being knighted, right, for this destructive behavior. And I guess where I'm heading with this, Bill, is I have a problem with that the same way you do. Why worship this man who caused this much destruction for this country?
Well, I think that not so many people worship him so much anymore, and I think as the history books are written, more people are starting to recognize that his policy both helped set the groundwork and in terms of his regulating the things the regulators are supposed to, and then also from a monetary standpoint, really helped directly cause these problems. And as he said, it was a couple of decades for the SEC going downhill. It was also a couple of decades of economic and financial market mismanagement and misbehavior here. I mean, we didn't get to this horrendous place we found ourselves last fall just in the Bush years. I mean, it was 20 years of abuse by the Fed.
Bill, one final question. You mentioned earlier about monkeying around with the business cycles. Was it time for the U.S., I'm asking you to speculate a little bit here, but was it time for the U.S. to enter a depression? And have we avoided that with all of these games that have been played? Or just help me out with that.
I think that given the size of the bubble that was the final real estate credit bubble, which followed the equity bubble, we were going to have an epic-sized collapse and all kinds of problems. Quite easy to see that was coming, and it was going to end, and it was going to be like it was. I didn't have any idea that the banks had drank that much Kool-Aid and that they had all the bad paper. In the height of the real estate craze, I kept wondering who had all the bad paper. I figured it was, some housewife in Tokyo collectively or some dentist in Germany. Well, the banks had it all, right? The brokerage firms had it all. Whether we need to have a depression, need and depression are kind of two words you don't really, I think, want to string together. But I think that sobering up and getting back to the business of real business and getting away from so much phoniness would be, I think, quite helpful. I guess, unfortunately, things were so rotten that the financial system was going to vaporize, and we can try to decide whether we would really have wanted to have the financial system vaporize and the unintended consequences of that, which could have perhaps destroyed some legitimate businesses that didn't need to be destroyed. Instead, we've got this big do-over now, and we're going to have other unintended consequences. And I don't know, the financial system vaporization for some sort of prolonged set of problems going forward, and I don't know which would have turned out better. Probably taking the medicine may have turned out better, but it seems sort of unfair to me, the numbers of innocent people that could have gotten mauled on top of the innocent people that got mauled simply because of the irresponsibility of some small subset of society, you know what I mean? So here we are, and the sad part is that rather than really learn some lessons from this, we're just continuing to operate in a kind of semi-business-as-usual fashion. Wall Street back to speculating. The politicians don't even pretend to try to want to get to the heart of the problem. They don't seem to understand that these were two bubbles. We hollowed out the economy. We are going to have trouble creating jobs. They don't seem to get that. They want to talk about health care. And while I agree health care should be addressed and Social Security and all that stuff, if we can't create jobs and we don't run the country, there's not going to be any pie to divide. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, Bill. Well, thank you for joining us so much. We're going to be doing this once a month with you for the future, and I greatly appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks again for those good questions. You can't make them too tough, or I won't be able to answer them.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you for joining us at KingWorldNews.com. Remember to tune in next week for another great show where we will have Dr. Marc Faber, author of the Gloom, Boom, Doom Report, as well as Bob Quartermain, Chairman and CEO of Silver Standard Resources. Also, remember to go to our Gold Plus page for exclusive weekly interviews with Ted Butler and Gatta.